The rain was relentless that night, drumming against the window like a warning, but when I opened the door, I didn't hesitate. There she was, Madeline, soaked to the bone, her eyes wide and trembling, as if she had carried the weight of the world on her shoulders just to reach my doorstep. "Is there room in your bed?" she whispered, her voice breaking with vulnerability. My heart seized not from desire but from the raw honesty in her words. I hesitated for only a heartbeat before replying, "Yes, but do you want to stay with me forever?" And in that instant, I realized how fragile life could be, how fleeting the moments that could define us, and how love in its quietest form sometimes appears in a soaked coat and a trembling smile. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in the magic of small gestures that can change a life, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to this channel, because some stories deserve to be felt by everyone. I still remember the first time I met Madeline. It was a chilly October morning in Portland, the kind of day where the fog wraps around your shoulders and makes you feel like the city itself is breathing. She had been new to the neighborhood, carrying boxes of her life from across the country. I was fumbling with my own burdens, heartache from a failed relationship, the quiet ache of loneliness that sometimes presses down so heavily you forget what happiness feels like. We collided at the corner coffee shop, literally, spilling lattes and apologies across the worn wooden floor. She laughed in that soft, melodic way that makes the world pause for a second, and in that moment, I knew that life had handed me an unexpected chance at connection. But life isn't always generous with its timing. Over the next few months, we became friends in the slow, cautious way that only two people scarred by the past can. There were nights when we would sit on my worn-out couch, drinking cheap wine and talking about dreams that felt too big for our small apartments, about heartbreak that lingered like a stubborn ghost, about family, failures, and the invisible wounds that nobody else sees. Madeline was bright, fiercely independent, and yet beneath that strength, there was a fragility I could almost touch, the kind that makes you want to protect someone, even when they insist they don't need saving. And I was still learning how to open my heart, how to trust that someone could stay without leaving. That night, when she knocked on my door, everything had changed. She had been walking home after a late shift at the bookstore where she worked, and the rain had caught her off guard. But it wasn't just the rain. I could see it in her eyes, the exhaustion, the fear, the longing for a safe place to land. And in that moment, the world outside ceased to exist. I wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and led her inside, not knowing if I was offering comfort or claiming it for myself. We sat on the edge of my bed, the storm outside a distant roar compared to the silence that hung between us. And then she asked again, softer this time, "Do you really mean it?" I nodded, feeling a lump rise in my throat. "I do," I said, not just to her, but to the universe, as if saying it aloud would make it real. She hesitated, then slowly crawled into bed beside me. It was an awkward, tender moment at first. Two people who had built walls around their hearts, now inches apart, unsure how to bridge the gap without breaking something fragile. I could feel her shivering, and instinctively, I pulled her closer, wrapping my arms around her as if to say, without words, "I won't let anything hurt you." And she rested her head against my chest, the way you might rest against faith itself, and I realized that this tiny human connection, was more powerful than anything I had ever known. Life, however, rarely allows such moments to exist without challenge. Madeline carried her own battles, family issues, past heartbreak, the pressure of work that seemed to demand more than she could give, and I had my own scars, wounds from trust broken, moments of doubt that whispered in the night. There were nights we fought quietly, arguing over misunderstandings, over words left unsaid, over fears we couldn't admit. But somehow, each time we returned to the same point, side by side, raw and honest, learning that love isn't just about romance. It's about patience, about showing up even when it's inconvenient, about holding someone when the world refuses to. One particularly difficult evening, a week after that first night in my bed, Madeline received news that her father had fallen gravely ill. She didn't tell me immediately, trying to carry the weight alone, but I saw it in the hollow look of her eyes, the way she spoke in monotone, the way her hands trembled as she held a cup of tea. Without asking, I took her hand and told her she didn't have to face it alone, and she broke, the tears coming in silent streams as she whispered fears she had kept buried for years. I held her through the night, rocking her gently as though we were children again, learning that sometimes love is less about passion and more about presence, about being a shelter in the storm. Weeks turned into months. We built routines, small moments that mattered. The shared coffee in the morning, the quiet walks through the streets of Savannah, the way we laughed at silly movies while wrapped in blankets. Every day, I found myself falling deeper, not just for the warmth of her smile or the sparkle in her eyes, but for the courage it took to stay, for the trust she offered freely, for the love that had grown quietly, insistently, like ivy over a brick wall. And then came the night that would change everything. We had spent the evening at a small diner talking about our dreams, our fears, our futures. The night was calm, the stars hidden behind a soft veil of clouds. Walking back to my apartment hand in hand, Madeline stopped and turned to me, her eyes serious, shining with something I had never seen before. She asked softly, almost afraid of my answer, "Do you think we could have forever?" My heart pounded. I thought of every night we had shared, every laugh, every tear, every quiet moment that had stitched our lives together. I pulled her close and whispered, "Yes, and I want to spend it with you." It wasn't instant. Love rarely is. There were still doubts, still moments of fear, but together we learned that forever isn't a promise made in a single night. It's built day by day, in small acts of care, in the courage to forgive, in the willingness to show up even when it's hard. And each time we faced life's storms, each time we felt the cold brush of uncertainty, we found strength in the warmth of the bed we shared, the hands we held, the quiet whispers in the dark that said simply, "You are home." Tonight, as I look at Madeline sleeping peacefully beside me, I understand the miracle of that midnight knock, the vulnerability of her question, and the bravery it took for both of us to answer honestly. There is room in my bed, yes, but more than that, there is room in my heart for someone willing to stay, to trust, to love. And in her presence, I have learned that the deepest connections are forged not in grand gestures, but in quiet moments, in shared fears, in the simple decision to be there for one another, always. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of the beauty of kindness, of second chances, or the quiet strength of love, please engage with this video. Like, comment, share, and subscribe. And before you leave, I have a special request. Comment below the name of someone who has ever knocked on your door, literally or metaphorically, and changed your life forever. Madeline stirred, half awake, and smiled in her sleep. And I realized that sometimes the most profound love is the one you never expected, the one that begins in the middle of a storm, in the soft knock of hope on a cold, rainy night. And sometimes, just sometimes, answering that knock with an open heart can change everything. Forever is not just a word, it is a choice, and that night we chose it together.